Well, a warm welcome back to Sport Integrity Week. It is unfortunately our final day, but we've got an incredible lineup this afternoon, focusing over the next few hours in particular on safeguarding, as we did also in the previous panel. Just to mark your card, 3 o'clock CET, 2 o'clock GMT, the clear and present danger safeguarding children and young people in sport. I'll be moderating that one. And in a moment, our other safeguarding panel, also focusing on children in sport, will look more at the legal and psychological aspects of safeguarding youth and children. The hashtag to get involved with is SIW, and ask lots of questions through the app as well. And I keep pushing this as well because it's really important. If you'd like to donate to SIGA, you can sync up with the Q code at the bottom of the screen or via our social handles, and that gives you the opportunity to go to our Eventbrite donation page. And not only can you donate to this non-profit organisation, the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, or SIGA, as we call ourselves, if you're unfamiliar with us, but in addition, you can vote on how the money will be spent. Have some fun with us as well. Tell us whereabouts in the world you are watching, who you work for. Take a picture of you at home. Maybe you're working from home because maybe you're back in the office, but wherever you are in the world, take a visual for us, post it on social, and use that hashtag SIW as well. So let's introduce our next panel now. 2 o'clock CET, 1 o'clock, of course, GMT. And good morning to anyone getting up bright and early in America. On the East Coast, of course, it's breakfast time. On the West Coast, maybe you're still in bed, but you can join us a little bit later. This panel, like I say, is called Safeguarding Children in Sport, a personal, legal and psychological account, and it focuses on physical education and sport, which are important to help ensure the healthy development of children and young people. Participation in sport should, of course, be encouraged. It should be a positive and safe experience, and we'll elaborate on how we can ensure that at all levels of the game and in lots of different kinds of sport. Our moderator for this panel is Pamela Serra. She is the section head Sport and Recreation Management at Tshwane University of Technology. Pamela, it is a very good afternoon to you, and I will hand over for you to give a brief introduction and to introduce yet another incredible panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Ben, and welcome Stage Africa. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all around the world. I have the privilege to share this panel with amazing speakers, and with me today to discuss and share the experiences and expertise when it comes to safeguarding children in sport I will start with Professor Paul Singh, an expert in creative and innovative thinking and research in business management and leadership. He is a propounder of and provides consultancy services in the latest and future thinking and theories impacting on social transformation. He is also actively and has been involved in influencing policy and legislative frameworks relating to sport safety, recreation, fitness, and health. Welcome, Prof. Singh.
Thank you, Pam. Good afternoon to the audience.
Our next member, Mrs. Wafika Beg Yazim. She is a legal manager at the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport, otherwise known as SAIDS, a law graduate from the University of Pretoria and admitted attorney. Wafika holds a master's degree in international sport law, obtained from the ISDE Business Law School in Madrid, Spain. She further possesses a sport management certificate by the Nelson Mandela University, which is endorsed by FIFA and CIS. She has further worked for the South African Football Association as the project manager in the portfolio of legal and compliance. She has experience and knowledge of football governance structures, sponsorship agreements, broadcasting license agreements, disciplinary hearings, and litigation. I still have more to say. Wafika currently specializes in anti-doping in sport and has dealt with matters before the CAS and represented South Africa at both continental and international level on platforms such as the Third African Union Anti-Doping Think Tank Forum, as well as world conferences on doping in sport. She serves as an independent legal advisor to the Safe Sports Commission of the South African Gymnastics Federation as well. A mouthful, but welcome, Wafika. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Another beauty with plenty brains, Dr. Debbie Alexander. She holds a PhD in neuropsychology in sport, qualification holder. Dr. Debbie Alexander is a clinical psychologist in private practice, an extraordinary senior lecturer in the psychiatry department within the medical and health sciences faculty at Stellenbosch University in the Cape, where she is also the program coordinator of the MPhil degree Mindfulness. Her leadership roles in international, continental, and national sport include, but are not limited to, governing board member of the International Paralympic Committee, where she's also a member on the Safeguarding Working Group, governing board member on the International Triathlon Union, where she further serves on the Medical and Anti-Doping Portfolio, board member on the South African Sport Confederation and Olympic Committee, where she served as both director for the Professional Body for Sports Coaching and the chairperson of the Safeguarding Policy Working Group. And I need to profoundly excuse myself and apologize, Prof. Debbie. Her CV is extreme, ladies and gentlemen. Please go and read all about it, because really, really, it is something to look up to. Welcome, Dr. Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pamela. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our friends in sport around the world. And thank you for joining us.
And our final candidate, not only a successful businessman in running and operating a gymnastic club, he's an ex-Springbok and Protea coach in gymnastics and tumbling, a sexual abuse survivor, currently the general manager at Premier Africa, an NGO for physical literacy for children, quoted as a real social innovator. His passion for developing children is what his friends and colleagues highlight as his shining armor. Glenn, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get on to the session. So it's about safeguarding children in sport. And children's rights in and around sport are protected by many international treaties, conventions, declarations, protocols, etc. Similarly, in South Africa has enshrined children's rights in its constitution that was designed to protect, promote, and fulfill the rights of all people in its country. This commitment resonates with international principles. With that said, I would like to open the session with a quote from the former United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, who argued, and I open quote, "There is no trust more sacred than the one the world holds with children. There is no duty more important than ensuring that their rights are respected, that their welfare is protected, and that their lives are free from fear and want, and that they can grow up in peace. There is an obligation to protect, promote the survival, development, and well-being of children, which ultimately affects their quality of life." And I close the quote. What that resounds to me is that of obligation, or otherwise the duty, the responsibility, the commitment to protect and to promote the survival, development, and well-being of children. Yes, it is precisely though this limit, or the lack thereof, that has us here discussing safeguarding in children, however. And straight off the bat, or should I say rather straight off the gym bar, seeing that your years in gymnastics, Glenn, are many, please do share with us your experiences within the world of gymnastics. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you very much. Well, geez, it's a long story that I've got to put in a short time. But in short, I was an elite gymnast, started gymnastics around the age of 9 or 10, and was involved with what I thought was an exceptional coach, very well respected, the coach to be with. You know, I felt like I'd landed my bum in the butter. Great coach, great credentials, trusted by everyone, trusted by my parents, and I was in good hands, in inverted commas. But that soon turned into sexual abuse over many years, starting at the age of 11, which took me on a tremendous personal journey into adulthood. But what it also did, it held my talent and it held my sport to ransom, because I was with this fantastic coach that everyone respected, and never saw an outlet to start talking about what actually happened to me. Would I be believed? Would I be taken seriously? And to be honest with you, in the 80s, 90s, this subject was even more taboo, especially in South Africa. I certainly never had the ability to even talk about it at home. And I came from a very good home, but it was a conservative home where sex was not spoken about, bodies were not spoken about. We had to find our own way in life. So the abuse had a massive toll on me. It ultimately made me stop gymnastics at the age of 16. I started rebelling and getting away from it. And I had my own personal emotions to deal with, sexuality, suicide, just not knowing who I was. My whole soul and all who I was unrecognizable. I did not know who or what I was. And I guess I'm here just to highlight that a lot of people just, they spend quite a bit of time on the abuse itself, but it's the aftermath that leaves a devastating path for life, I would say. I think I'm one of the lucky ones in terms of facing my demons, going through a tremendous amount of therapy. I was determined to survive this, and not to survive this, to thrive after this, and had to accept there will always be a wounded part of me that I would have to manage in the form of anxiety at times, in the form of depression at times. And even with all the help and support I've had, these are the remnants that unfortunately have stuck with me. So for me, the education and the conversation around this needs to be upfront. It needs to be honest. I have got to a point where there's nothing taboo. I'm happy to talk about absolutely everything, but my focus is education. My focus is educating coaches and parents mainly. I don't feel I'm equipped to talk to children about this. This is where the professionals need to come in. But what I can do is set the correct visual understanding and mental understanding of what abuse is and how it looks, because I feel like people have got that completely wrong. I think abuse is sometimes thought as a very violent act. I think it's thought about done by strangers or someone who just comes into your life, and the grooming process is the opposite of that. If I have to describe this coach in my life, outside of what he did to me, he would have ticked all the boxes of what a good coach should be. He was just, unfortunately, a sexual deviant as well. So the understanding of what abuse looks like, the grooming process, and the manipulation and abuse outside of sexual abuse, the mental abuse, and in my case, in the 80s, physical abuse. You know, the hitting and that wasn't frowned on as much as it is today, but it was all part of the grooming process of keeping me in control and taking away my power. And it took me years to understand how little power I had in that time. As an adult, you try think about justifying or what I should and could have done as an adult. And I had to really get myself through a lot of therapy to understand as a 10-year-old how much power and how little power I actually had. And so there's so much to talk about, but that's my journey in a short space of time.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much. I'm going to come to you, Dr. Debbie. I'm not going to lie. When one hears stories of this nature, it's an underestimation, but it's hair-raising to say the least. With your expertise within your field, could you elaborate on what Glenn's just mentioned with regards to lasting effects that trauma as well as the signs that social agents within the sports industry should, pick up on, or possibly could pick up if non-guarding or non-safeguarding, should I say, of children is present. Just that first point there, and then following up to that, Dr. Debbie, additionally, how do we help also the perpetrator? Because by all means, there is definitely a problem if a perpetrator is indeed acting, with this sort in this form. Is there some type of rehabilitation that one could prescribe? Although I must admit, just listening to Glenn's story, and if I think of, the own kids at our own houses, our children, our brothers and sisters, our nephews and nieces, I would literally lock them up and throw the key away, but that is definitely not going to obviously resolve the issue. So Dr. Debbie, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. I just want to pick up on something that Glenn said, and he stressed education, because obviously that's going to ensure that we prevent this sort of thing. But unfortunately, this happens, and how it impacts an individual will depend on a whole lot of things. It will depend on the context, the individual, the person's temperament, their support base. And, Glenn mentioned that he had really strong support base, but still that was difficult. It would also depend on the age of the child, their stage of development, the type of abuse, the length of the abuse. Also, was it a once-off? Was it a series of abuse that occurred? Then the severity of the abuse. And then there's online abuse as well as the actual physical abuse that we need to keep our minds on nowadays. And then, of course, it's the relationship between the child and the perpetrator, and there may or may not be physical harm. So we know that abuse is broad. So really, what is a person, what happens to the person that is impacted by abuse? That they would suffer fear, guilt, fear of being intimidated. Then there's also the sense of blame. There's the sense of shame, anger, rage, lots of worry, despair. They might become withdrawn. They might become silent. They might have, so when we talk about psychological impact, there's obviously the emotional, which I've just mentioned. Then there's the behavioral, and then there's also the cognition. So from the emotional, the physical perspective, they may have problems with sleeping. They may have problems with eating. They might have flashbacks, nightmares. They might also, from a cognitive perspective, have difficulty in remembering, attending, etc. So what are the early warning signs that we need to start looking for with these children? From an emotional perspective, notice whether their mood swings, whether the mood is low, whether they're irritable, whether they're frustrated. Is there a decrease in their confidence and their self-esteem? So if we just think of Glenn's scenario, what could one have observed in the sporting arena? Is there self-doubt? Maybe they think they're not good enough, or now that they're really bad and they don't deserve to be where they are. Then the aspects around cognition, they might have thoughts of harming themselves, or there's a lot of negative thinking. So if it's an athlete who was very positive and now they're starting to think negatively, one should become concerned. Then their behavior, are they yelling? Are they aggressive? Are they fighting? Are they volatile? And if it's a teenager, are they smoking, drinking, taking drugs? And of course, there's the physical aspects. They don't know how to voice what's happened to them. So they might have lots of aches and pains, or their motivation is down, or their energy is down, or they don't enjoy participating in any activities anymore. And then from a social perspective, they often that is impacted. They don't want to go out with friends. It impacts their academics and also their relationships. So those are all concerns. And of course, if it's not managed well, then we can have a situation where we have mental disorders and it impacts on the rest of their lives. As Glenn said, self-harming, they're impulsive, quick to anger, and huge relationship problems. So pretty much one needs to just keep an eye on that. Then from the offender's perspective, I think the thing we need to keep in mind is, once they've offended, it's now how do we reduce the risk of them offending again? So if they're high risk, then we need to put more time and effort into the rehabilitation. And if they're low risk, it probably takes less time. But again, this will depend on whether the person is motivated to do that, whether they understand, what the consequences are of what they did and what the implications are. So we need to consider some of those aspects. What are the risks, for this person reoffending, which we need to be aware of, is that, if they have difficulties in terms of sexual deviance, if they prefer being with children, or if the sexual assault was in a violent nature, we need to consider their lifestyle, their childhood behavior patterns. Were they a juvenile delinquent? Do they have prior offenses? So do they have support? Do they live alone? Are they personality disordered? Are they hostile personality? All of these we want to take into consideration when we're looking at treating these. Sometimes we're actually wasting our time, I guess, with engaging in rehabilitation. But again, that one has to go through a whole assessment to establish, what can and can't we do. Then, of course, do they live alone? Do they have conflicts with their intimate partners? What is their support base? And then, do they actually come for treatment? Because often they come because they're compelled to come, but then in fact they fall off the bus. They're not prepared to continue, and then perhaps they do come, but they're actually not motivated, and they've got the wrong attitude. And then we're aware, well, this is going to be problematic. And what would we do with these offenders? We would look at self-regulation, look at rules of consent, anger management, stress management. We teach them skills. There's cognitive behavioral therapy interventions that we can do. And then we'll need to look at what are the needs that are not being met that's led them to do what they're doing. And then also work on perhaps strengthening relationships. Is there room for that kind of intervention? But yes, it's for each person, as it is with the person who's got been the victim. We need to take into consideration the context and the person. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Debbie. Definitely not a clear black and white or simple answer for sure. Wafika, as a legal expert coming to you, we see that, keeping with international trends, South Africa has key legislative developments that have been introduced, as well as old laws that have been repealed. The children's right movement has been loud and forceful with the initiation and introduction of the Child's Act, the Child Justice Act, just to name a few. You are the expert, so could you elaborate on key aspects regarding safeguarding of children? Wafika, just unmute your mic quickly for us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. The most important thing is to remember that there is the South African Constitution, and more specifically in the South African Constitution, there's the Bill of Human Rights, and it safeguards any human life from such wrongful acts, which are then considered criminal offenses. So a child is protected by the Bill of Rights and is afforded a right of recourse in terms of the Children's Act, as well as the Criminal Procedure Act. So when dealing with these criminal offenses involving minors, the minor as well as the parent or the legal guardian of that minor, if they want to pursue charges against such perpetrator, they have to first consider what is in the best interest of that minor, and also think about participation in court proceedings and the effects it could have on that minor. And the Children's Act lays that down. And this can be available in the Criminal Courts Act, in the criminal court or within the children's court. And then the court cases, the case records are protected. So both courts can make a finding that the convicted perpetrator is unsuitable to work with children, and then this person is added to the National Register for Sex Offenders. And then obviously this register gives employers in the public and private sector the right to check that person being hired is fit to actually work with children. Then we have the National Sports and Recreation Bill of 2020, where an amendment was made or is proposed that the sporting organization, before they can employ, for instance, a foreign coach or foreign sport personnel into South Africa, there has to be full vetting of that person, as well as a criminal record verification of the country from which that foreigner came. The other additional amendment to the National Sports and Recreation Bill, they speak about vulnerable communities. So the Minister of Sports can create regulations regarding the protection of vulnerable communities. In anti-doping, we refer them to as protected persons. So the protected persons will be minors, persons under the age of 18, as well as in sport, it covers women, females as well, and then persons with disabilities. And then, of course, we've got the basic education department, as well as that has policies to prevent measures from this happening. And then the UNESCO quality physical education policy specifically ensures that teachers and coaches should be trained in accordance with child protection and safeguarding principles, and should have their knowledge refreshed on a regular basis, so that when incidents like this are reported or suspected, that they know what to do in that event.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wafika. Thank you for that insight. Linking to what Wafika has just said, Prof. Singh, if I can bring you into this with your active involvement in legislation and policy with regards to consultancy, could you elaborate specifically in South Africa on, as I mentioned, what Wafika just said with regards to how does it unfold in South Africa, specifically within sport, with your experience and your insights? Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Thank you, Pam. In terms of the discussion so far and the issue of harassment and abuse, what I'd like to start off pointing out is that in sport, most of us that get involved in sport do so for the positive values associated with sport. But at the same time, we must make sure that we recognize that sport is a fertile ground for abuse, for harassment. In fact, all the elements, all the individual items, if I can call it a recipe for sexual abuse and harassment, all are present in sport. So the first thing that we've got to do is, moving from the legislation that Wafika just described now, a next level is the issue of policies. Because from legislation, you go to policies, and from policies, you put them into practice. So at the level of policies, the National Department of Sport, which is the custodian for sport in terms of government, forming regulations and policies, has a policy that it has, it's a code of conduct that is drawn up in 2016 already, and it uses this to get the different national sport federations to sign up to, so that all their personnel comply with the code of conduct. And within that code of conduct, surely it also covers issues of harassment and abuse. Then, because we are talking children and sport, we must understand that a lot of these learners or children fall under the custody of the National Department, the Department of Basic Education. And the Department of Basic Education also has legislation and policy. It's got a specific toolkit known as Speak Out. And so this is available, it's widely distributed. Now here is the anomaly, that while the Department of Basic Education has the legislation, they have the policy, they've distributed this, the toolkit is distributed, the educators know about this, but it is the one sector in our country where you have the highest incidence of harassment and abuse. And not necessarily just in sport, I'm talking in education. So it's a sector that we have to particularly be mindful of. And within that sector, we also have then sport, school sport. So there is an expectation that what happens in education in the general environment can happen in the environment of sport within schools as well. So when we come to the Olympic Committee, we had a national conference last year in May, where there were several international experts. And we've worked out and written down what we call the Johannesburg Declaration on Safeguarding Against Abuse and Harassment in Sport. So this has become adopted by the Olympic Committee, and it has been circulated to all the national sport federations so that they comply with the policy, they abide by it, but also they make that for themselves, for their own federation, and write it down as policy, because this charter is more a framework for the issue of safeguarding. So that is there as well. In addition to that, I can give you an example of what I regard as good practice. In our country, in the sport of gymnastics, we have formed a safe sport commission, and we are in the process of finalizing our terms of reference. And I think in the next 2 weeks, we expect to hear our first case. What this is about is listening to, very much like the Voice project in the UK and in Europe, we are giving a voice to people who want to feel safe in a safe, comforting and supportive environment, to come forward and talk their case, to give us the experience, and we would then listen to it and advise them. Also, where there's a referral needed, to refer it to the safety officer of gymnastics in the country so that the matter can be pursued. Of course, there's several things that we can do relating to this, apart from the issues of education and training programs, etc. So what I want to say is, when it comes to the issue of policy legislation in this area, let us not only see it as a duty. Yes, it is a legal duty. We all have a responsibility, but I would say, let it come from here. Let it come from our hearts. And if we can, every person, every day, in our daily operations within sport, think safeguarding, I think we will go a long way. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Prof. Singh. And just going to our chat, I'd like to remind everyone, please do send in your questions. I have a question from Dalton Myers, and his question is, and I propose it to the panel, please do answer as you see fit. He requests or wants to know, what role does culture play in all of this? He says in Jamaica, where he is from, there are a number of challenges with regards to change in the culture of how coaches or adults deal with children in sports, and letting them know that some of the practices are not normal but forms of abuse. So what role does culture play in the safeguarding of children? How can we change it? Prof, Debbie, being also obviously from the coaching perspective there, what are your thoughts on this question?
Okay, I'd like to just start by saying, in sport, we do have a problem. Apart from just the problem that we are speaking about, sport has a very high, when we speak about the culture of sport, sport globally, and in our country as well, has a very high tolerance for sexual abuse and harassment. This is what the research shows us. Now, I've just mentioned that we have the perfect recipe, ideal recipe in sport for this to occur. What has to happen is, if we are speaking about safeguarding and we want safeguarding to be introduced and spread throughout all sports and practiced daily, then safeguarding has to be embedded in the culture of that sport. And this is what we are attempting to do as a start with gymnastics in South Africa. So very, very important then that the culture in sport, the culture of individual sports has to change.
All right, Dr. Debbie, would you like to add on that?
Yes, please. Thank you. I want to go back to the education, because this is where we can all make a difference. And I want to also touch on Paul mentioning about coming from the heart. So yes, I completely agree that there are different cultures around the world, but each sport in itself has its own culture. So I'll give you an example of, and because I'm in sport involved at an international level, I'm often at events internationally, and I've witnessed a lot of abuse of athletes, from coaches, from parents. And for me, and this comes from my heart, I just go straight up to them and I say, in our sport, this is not how we manage the situation. We can do it in a different way. And I actually don't care whether they like me or not, or what I have to say, but at least the penny has dropped, the parent or the coach gets the message, but the athlete learns you can actually stand up and say something. And the more we stand up and say something, the more we will teach, because the athletes learn by observing us. So we need to lead by example. If we see something's not right, say it. Doesn't matter.
Yes, Glenn.
Pamela, sorry, I just want to come in there. I think abuse is at all levels at sport, but it's more likely at high level sport because of the amount of time the athletes are spending with their coaches and the access. If there's access, there's abuse. If there's no access, there's no abuse. It's as simple as that. So the culture's got to change in many ways. I just want to make 2 points. The first point I want to make is, if the sport or the result is more important than the child or the athlete, there's going to be abuse. So the coach is ultimately the most important cog in this wheel, because if you put the child first, you may or may not get the result. But if you put the sport first, you will get some form of abuse. Even at the very least, it's emotional abuse, too much screaming or shouting or whatnot. So the goals of the coach and the goals of the sport at high level is the ultimate. Do you try to get that 1% up there and see what happens, and no matter what? Or does anybody who come through you land up to be a better person, a better sportsman in life because of you, and you may not get the result? So I think the coach is one of the huge things as well. And that goes for the parents as well. I was involved in higher level sport for many times. Sometimes the parents want the result as much as the coach. So you've got this pawn in the middle of this child that is feeling held ransom by their sport, by their coach, by their parents, feeling nowhere to go. So I think at the end of the day, what is the goal? Is the goal results, or is the goal getting the best out of this child? And you know what? Please God, the best child in that sport as well. So I think the culture, and I think the coaches are in a very difficult position, because they look up a lot to, I won't mention countries, but that I know in gymnastics, I will say it, and please God, it's changed. The Eastern countries, we looked up to Russia, we looked up to China in the past, and it's a very, very strict regime. There's no talking back. Your opinion doesn't count. You scream and shout. Stay in the team, don't stay in the team. There's 20 kids behind you waiting for your spot. A lot of emotional sabotage, a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Manipulation. So it's a very deep subject. And this is where the education to me comes is so important. Of course, it's a forum for abusers and children of abuse to come forward, but the education of the coaches and the parents to say, at the end of the day, what is the most valuable thing in this next 10, 15-year journey in sport? And that's your child.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other members want to add to that? There's no other questions at the moment. And what I'd like to do, just to wrap up the session, we're nearly there. I would just like to say, with what was shared with us, I think something that really comes very strongly with regards to culture, if we are to change or try to change this culture within sport, I think the first activist is us ourselves, as Prof. Singh mentioned, as Dr. Debbie mentioned as well. It comes from the heart, from here. And with that, I believe that all members at all levels, coming from education myself, we all have a duty, and not only a duty, as Prof. Singh said, an obligation, a commitment. That's what I'd like to actually highlight it as, a commitment to understand, to have the knowledge, to educate ourselves with regards to relevant structures, relevant protocols, agreements, declarations, specifically to our context. So it does start with you, the individual. With that, I'd like to thank our panel members. Thank you so much for your time, taking time out of your busy schedules. And with that said as well, I would like to just take this moment to thank SIGA, to thank the organizers behind all of this. We don't see them, but they are hard at work. So thank you to all the organizing team and the technicians as well. And lastly, but not least, I would like to say a blessed weekend to everyone. Let us carry on and carry our hearts through. And a blessed weekend to everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you.